Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and one man's life or death is but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I seek.
Which man, Anna? Got to get that out there. Hi, I'm Daniel Dresner, and Anna, to me the idea of an immediate union with my cousin definitely inspires horror and dismay.
Lots of cousins.
Yep, cousins marrying here. Little weird.
There was a lot of cousins marrying each other in the early 19th century.
I know, it was a thing. Yes, fair enough.
Yeah. Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of
prestige goods
and voluntary motherhood. Today we'll be talking about Mary Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, which is available at bookstores and on the interwebs because it's free. It's free. Information wants to be free.
Miraculously, copyright laws have not gone quite that far back. So yes, this is available to one and all. It's tremendous.
I got my ebook from standardebooks.com, which has beautifully formatted ebooks of all kinds. Ooh. So that's where I recommend you get it. It is a donations, supported place.
Oh, that's great.
Throw them some bucks if you get your ebook there. Mm-hmm. In the next few weeks, we will discuss No One Will Save You, which is on Hulu. And then another book, Dan, a little trifle.
Yeah, we thought this was good. No one's really familiar with it, so we thought we would like to talk about it.
It's called The Shining.
Yeah.
The Shining.
And by this...
Shining.
It's by an author, is it Stephen King? Is that how you pronounce it?
If people are Stephen King fans, they might want to check out my other podcast, Dan. Yes? Which is the Stephen King podcast called Losers Club. I'm actually only on it every few months, but it is a good podcast. If this podcast is too short for you, Dan, if people listen to this podcast and they think, you know what, I could use another 2 hours of conversation.
And let's face it, most of our listeners are going to do that. Anna.
Right.
Yes.
You might want to check out the Losers Club, where the podcasts are regularly 3 hours long. God. And regularly we sit and talk for a 4-hour stretch, which...
Can I ask a technical question about this?
Yeah,
are you saying that you sit 4 hours and don't go to the bathroom at all?
We take a break. All right. We usually take a break.
That makes me feel better, because otherwise we'd be talking about labor, abuse in the podcast industry.
It is... I mean, the reason why I'm on it, as I've said, is because I actually do listen to the 3-hour discussions of various Stephen King books.
Wow.
And it's a very popular podcast. Okay. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway. Actually, kind of off topic, but yet on topic. Someone on the Discord mentioned sometimes they have a little film festival for themselves.
Oh.
They'll just plan out some movies and then watch them over a week or a weekend.
Sure.
The other podcast, the Losers Club, has a film festival. Mm. We should do a film festival, Dan, an at-home film festival.
Where we're all watching at the exact same time, you mean? Or
no, just over a week, and then it can be set up in the Discord so that people all have the same set of movies to watch.
I see. Okay, that's an interesting...
And kind of in relation to each other.
I think we should arrange this for the end of December, I'm going to suggest, or during a holiday break. That might be appropriate. Okay.
And we could do a special episode, kind of
I like
it could be all the Alien movies or something.
Yes, I like that. That might be an interesting idea. We will discuss. We'll workshop this. This is
okay.
Good. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I just mentioned patrons, Dan.
Yeah, and you know what? For those of you who are listening who are not patrons, might I suggest consider becoming a patron? Our Patreon page is patreon.com/spacethenation. Also, a great way to support the show that costs you nothing, because if you want to be a patron, that's about $5 a month.
Just labor.
Yeah,
labor.
Just a little bit of labor, the tiniest bit of labor. Please rate and review the show. Tell your friends and neighbors about it. Generate the good buzz thing. That would be...
Buzz.
Yeah.
You skeet
yes,
about it.
Exactly. Sheet about it.
Yes. Sheet about it. And if you're not a patron, you may have noticed that your episodes now have some ads.
Because we're a big fucking deal is why. No.
Just sprinkled about the show.
Yep.
Like cinnamon and nutmeg. Just little light topping.
Because it's late stage capitalism season, motherfuckers.
That's right. Is there a better metaphor for late stage capitalism than pumpkin spice lattes?
No.
I don't know.
Nope.
you know, it's manufactured like scarcity. Mm-hmm. It's like a completely invented thing. You can do it at home and yet you pay other people. Anyway, compensate us directly. Make your own pumpkin spice. Also, that's a thing you can do separate from paying us directly.
You can do both of these things. They're not mutually exclusive options, Anna. You can make your own pumpkin spice. You can pay us directly by becoming a patron. Because
make your own pumpkin spice latte. Okay, it involves just like pumpkin and like maple. Anyway, go ahead. Yes. Patrons should
do both of these things.
Become a patron.
Yeah. Because if there's one thing proponents and critics of capitalism can agree on, it is the virtues of eliminating the middleman. And so pay us directly. You won't have to listen to the man trying to make you pay indirectly. That's all we're saying.
And make your own pumpkin spice lattes. Dan, do you want to fill us in just quickly? How are you?
I'm doing well, Anna. You know, it is now officially fall here. And, you know, the leaves are finally starting to change. This is one definite effect from climate change. Like, it used to be that, like, the leaves would change where I live, like, around mid-September. Now they pretty much don't really start until 1st of October, I would say. But it's starting, and it's quite nice to see. How are you, Anna?
You know, I have this thing where I think it's weird that everyone talks about the weather when you ask people how they are. But then also, because of climate change and whatnot, like, the weather is often worth commenting on because we had 80 days of over 100 degrees, and we're about to have our first night under 60 degrees.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Good for you.
And the whole weekend, it's going to be in the 70s.
Oh, that's good weather.
So now I have no excuse not to clean out my garage, which I was allowing myself not to do since basically May, because it was, you know, like 100 degrees in there. So I didn't have to clean it. But now, well, I'll come up with some other excuse. But
I look forward to hearing that excuse next week. That'll be very, very interesting to hear.
Who knows what I might find in there?
I'm going to encourage the Discord to workshop some excuses for Anna. You know, just figure that stuff out because, you know, it'll be important.
I was going to try to get from the garage to the thing we're talking about, like referring to what I might find in the garage, like pieces and parts of experiments gone awry. Or, you know, that might fill me with loathing as soon as I see them because it reminds me of an unfinished work. Yeah. There's a lot in this book about writing, Dan, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's like it's all about the horror of first drafts, Anna. I mean, no one likes their first draft.
In some ways,
yeah, that's true. That's a fair point.
Anyway, so we're talking about Frankenstein.
Why are we talking about this? I think there's a couple of reasons. First is it's a cannon fodder episode. We haven't done one of those in quite some time. Second, It's October, Anna. This is a spooky month. Seems appropriate that we start like leaning into the horror aspect of the sci-fi, you know, horror genre. And you know, I'm kind of pumped about doing this because this is easily the oldest thing we very well may ever talk about. I mean, I think there's been a few examples of sci-fi prior to this, but this really, in some ways, is like the first one that most people will have heard of.
I think if we did like Utopia, right? Like that's
Thomas More. Yeah. I suppose. Yeah.
And then there's a 16th century text by Margaret Cavendish that's largely considered or largely considered? Is that how you say
generally
it?
Considered?
Widely.
Widely.
Large, wide.
Yeah, the same thing. Same thing. Like Frankenstein's monstrous girth, you know. Yeah.
Large and wide. Deep and wide. Margaret Cavendish, who I think was she wasn't a nun. That's a different thing. Also sci-fi related. But anyway, she wrote what's considered another one of the earliest sci-fi.
Right, but like I'm sure there are sci-fi nerds that are very familiar with Margaret Cavendish. If you ask who's Margaret Cavendish to the ordinary person.
Sure.
They're not going to know.
I'm not taken away from Mary Shelley. Yeah. Easily one of the most metal women.
Oh my God. Yes.
Like, if not just the 19th century, then ever.
Right.
She was a badass. And
she wrote this when she was 18 goddamn years old. I still cannot believe that. That is...
If there are flaws in this book, just keep reminding yourself.
You didn't write this when you were 18, listeners. Okay? Go back, read what you wrote when you were 18. I guarantee you, not as good as Frankenstein. Just accept that.
Yeah. And what's funny, I read the introduction, which she wrote in like 1831 to the the new edition. Yeah. And she mentions her juvenile efforts that she didn't like as much, which I guess when she was like 10. So I was excited to read this because, as I'll talk about a little bit more, perhaps this is the first time I've read
which
it.
I was stunned to hear. But yes, I mean,
so pleasantly surprised.
Excellent.
So pleasantly surprised.
All right, let's get to whether or not this podcast will ruin it for you. I think my answer is no, because most people are familiar with Frankenstein as a general narrative, but maybe read it anyway, because the analogy here I'm going to use is from the film Easy A, in which, the character of Olive warns everyone, read the Scarlet Letter, don't watch the film versions of the Scarlet Letter, particularly the one with Demi Moore, because, it's not going to be the same thing as the book. I do not recommend that high schoolers watch the film versions of Frankenstein in lieu of reading it, because I think the last two of them, there was one that came out a couple years ago with Aaron Eckhart, I think, which is just a bizarre thing. The less said about that, but the better. The more prestige one that came out, I think about 25 years ago, was Kenneth Branagh's version of Frankenstein, which the only thing I basically remember about that is that he's shirtless a lot of the time. But, so like Demi Moore's The Scarlet Letter, maybe not entirely accurate. That's all I'm saying. So read the goddamn book. Yeah.
It's very short. Mm-hmm. Not like super, super short, but pretty short. Right. And also, if you are going by just the movies, which I confess, I mean, I knew in some theoretical way it probably was very different because movies are movies.
But it is really, really different.
It's real different. It's really, really different. And what we have to say about it will make no sense for you unless you've read it. And the distance between the two, I was trying to come up with other movies that have had little to do with the book. And I came up with iRobot, the Will Smith version of iRobot, and then Lawnmower Man, which I don't know if you've actually only my Stephen King heads.
I'm not going to lie. I have watched the film version of the Lawnmower Man. It was one of the more unpleasant movie going experiences I can ever recall.
And it's like about cyberspace. It's ridiculously unpleasant. And the short story that Stephen King wrote is about a man that eats grass.
Are you serious? Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Good Lord.
It's like literally they have nothing to do with each other. That said, if you want to delay, there are zero surprises in this book. Yeah. Like, in fact, so few surprises, I was angry at one development that comes as a surprise to the main character.
Which really should not have been. Nope. Nope. Although, there is a small part of me that is willing to forgive Shelley for this, because again, in some ways, what we are reading are the beats that wind up informing later fiction. And that's important to realize. Like, the way I would put it is that in many ways, what Shelley is doing is like what economists talk about in terms of you never find $20 bills on the sidewalk. No one comes up with a genuinely new idea or something. This is a new idea. Like, it was the first
$20 bill on the sidewalk.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I would say, I don't know, as a literary device, like people mishearing or misreading warnings from soothsayers or whatever, or I mean, Shakespeare would
or Oedipus for that matter. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, okay, that's fair.
I mean, he wasn't, I mean, I guess the monster's not a soothsayer, but like warnings that are misheard or misinterpreted. Like that's a trope. That's true. But she was 18. Every time we criticize it, just one of us needs to say she was 18.
Yes, we need to have a button that says she was 18, and not in a Nicky way, but just like she was 18. Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right, let's get to previous experience. Anna, as you just said, I believe you had none.
I had none, and I don't know why. I think I said I never really have liked any Frankenstein movie except for, I guess, Young Frankenstein.
Oh, which is just freaking
probably
genius.
Has some real, but I'm betting it's pretty problematic if we went back and watched it like right now. But
I disagree. But
really
we should maybe we need to add that to the canon fodder list. Is all I'm going to say. Yeah.
All right. Or the film festival could be like comedy horror. We could do comedy horror for the film festival because I recently heard a podcast about the bad Ghostbusters remake or sequel that came out recently, and it made me want to rewatch Ghostbusters because I think it's probably has some problematic stuff. Anyway, moving on. Never saw it. Never really was interested.
And it was,
even though I knew Mary Shelley was.
And so it was never assigned in high school, which, by the way, even if it was assigned, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you read it. I mean, I don't know about you. My English AP batting average was about 500 in terms of books that were actually assigned. Oh, I have shocked Anna with this. Information. Yeah.
I'm speechless. Dan.
Yep. Anna.
I thought we were alike.
No, Anna. So how do I put this?
The reason I didn't do well in grad school is because I tried to read everything.
Okay, now I'm going to point out that once I got to college, I really did start reading everything. But Anna, I got A papers in high school on books that I never cracked open.
Like, you're such a fucking...
I know. To be fair, I didn't complain about it. I just but yes, I didn't always get an A, to be clear. I'm not saying I'm saying.
Look at the least amount of work I did. Look how I was rewarded for not trying.
I started working really hard once I got to college. It just took me a little later to grow up, Anna. Yeah.
I do think that my habit of trying to read everything did not serve me well in
You do have to learn triage then. It's absolutely true. But I did read this, which I recall enjoying, and I remembered the framing device, but I didn't remember a lot of it, and it was interesting to reread.
Well, epistolary and embedded. That's kind of a thing in this series, in this era of novels. But this has got some pretty serious meta embedding shit.
Speaking of which, let's get to the meta stuff, which is the story behind the story. And Anna, there are many times when you have to do this where I'm very glad you do it and I don't, but I confess this time I'm a little jealous of your task, because even I, am dimly aware that there involves some juicy early 19th century going on. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There is the TMZ version of her life.
That would actually be very funny if someone did a video of TMZ.
It would not be difficult, or Perez Hilton, a blog that was pretending to be a contemporary account of Mary Shelley's life could be very.
The Wongcat version of this would be amusing, Anna. Yeah.
Yes, it would be. Although we're dating ourselves. That's talking about the 19th century. If there was a blog. One of the most interesting characters, I think, in all of literature, I have to say. Although she's only really known for Frankenstein, her life was incredible and encompassed a lot of cool stuff. People probably know one of the pieces of lore already behind this. This is a fairly pop culture common knowledge that she wrote this as part of a ghost story challenge put forward by her and her husband, Percy Shelley's friend, Lord Byron.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
As a way to amuse themselves during a summer of bad weather on Lake Geneva. This is not the most important thing to know about the background of this book. There's so much, seriously, I'm not going to try to even get into the detail of Mary Shelley, but I want to go through some of the highlights of her life that I think impact directly this story. So,
go for it.
Number 5. This is from.
Okay, so we're going number 5. Counting down from 5 to 1.
Counting down. Yes. Mary Shelley is the only child, or was the only child, of William Godwin, one of the earliest anarchist philosophers, if not one of the fathers of anarchism.
Just to be clear, not the father of Godwin's Law, for those of you who were 21st century.
No,
that's a different
one.
Yeah.
And the extremely radical early feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, both of whom wrote very impactful things. Mary Wollstonecraft, most famous, in defense of the vindication of the rights of women, I believe. Yep. I found this interesting. Godwin illustrated his philosophies in a mystery novel in which legal and other institutions, he argued, legal and other institutions can and do destroy individuals, even when they are innocent of any crime. This may come up later. There's some stuff about that. Well,
that's all old. I mean, we don't have this problem now, Anna. I mean,
True. Although, he was, like I said, sort of among the earliest to really be society bad, all institutions corrupt. Number 4. Her mother died while giving birth to her. 3. Her father was unable to make much money as an anarchist philosopher.
You know why, Anna? Because he didn't cotton to big anarchy.
So she grew up without much money, living off the donations given to her father by other richer anarchists.
I'm sorry, I just like the idea that just go to the League of Richer Anarchists. They've got fellowships for this stuff.
They weren't serious anarchists. Okay. I'm thinking they were the dabblers. They were the poser.
They were hipster anarchists, Anna.
Hipper anarchists. Yes. Okay. Number 2. At 16, she met and fell in love with the still very married Percy Shelley,
the poet,
and they consummated their relationship on her mother's.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm telling you, metal.
That even by 2023 standards, that is hardcore. Yes.
Yeah, it's hardcore. So she got pregnant almost immediately, and her father refused to speak to her. She ran off.
I'm sorry. Hold on. Can we have a timeout? I want to understand correctly. Her father, the anarchist, who rejects all institutions, gets upset because Mary Shelley has an affair. Like that. Wow. Okay. Wow.
All right. So this is actually an interesting point to make because the free love philosophy is that everyone's okay with it. It's polyamory.
Yeah. And to be fair, I suspect Percy Shelley's wife was not great with it.
Percy Shelley's wife was not only not okay with it, she winds up committing
suicide. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
But that happened after this was published, so I'm not including it in the most important facts about her, what was going on for her, like when she wrote this. But there was a lot of terrible tragedy in Mary Shelley's life. Which leads to
the most important thing. Number one.
Yes, the most important thing, number one most important thing for people to know about the background of this book is that a year prior to writing it, her first child died 2 weeks after being born. And if you haven't read the book, maybe some of this stuff will be like, I don't know quite how that, But if you are kind of following our discussion or starting to realize the differences between this book and the movies, this is a book about creation and about the relationship between the creator and the created. Yes. And there is so much death and grief in this book.
Just a wee bit. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tragedy, by the way, just to clue you in. It doesn't have a happy ending.
It's tragedy just all over. Like every single piece of it is pretty tragic. And then as far as other stuff about her life, free love triangles. She also wrote another science fiction novel called The Last Man that's about a pandemic, Dan.
Oh. Is that related? I mean, I know that was based on a graphic novel, but is Why the Last Man in some ways inspired by that?
I don't think so. When I looked at the Wikipedia entry, I also thought, well, interesting. It does end with a man befriending a sheepdog to wander the earth with.
We might need to read this, Anna.
I don't know how good it is. Like, it was out of print for a long time. It wasn't well reviewed. But then again, like, who knows? I think I will probably look at some of the writing about it and see if it's worth
we can contemplate this. This is fair.
Anyway, there are lots of books and articles about Mary Shelley. I highly encourage people to check it out. Again, and also Mary Wollstonecraft, just fascinating.
I would add, to show how relevant this still is, the week we recorded this, there was an article in the New Yorker reviewing 3 books that are either directly about Mary Shelley, fiction about Mary Shelley, fiction within the Frankenstein universe, obvious homages to Frankenstein. So this is still a live book in the sense of it still engages people.
And I think the reason why it's still so alive is that it is bigger than this idea of scientific hubris. I think the relationship between the creator and the created and the care between loved ones, different kinds of loving relationships. Because the other thing that's in this book, and I'll shut up and we'll talk about more later, but there is various different kinds of love explored, like paternal, maternal, friendship, filial. There's all sorts of relationships in this book, all of which end tragically.
Yes. Nothing ends well, I will say again, in this book. Yep.
But it kind of offers a little poo-poo platter of love, you know,
you know what? I read somewhere that was Shelley's alternate title, Poo-Poo Platter of Love.
You just little samples of all these different kinds of love.
If they publish it again, we should publish a version Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the Poo-Poo Platter of Love.
I do.
All right, let's get to Chekhov's What's It. This is the thing that often appears in the first act of the book that winds up being somewhat salient later on. Anna, what do you have? Okay, we're both in the same boat here. So there is only one Chekhov's thing, which is Chekhov's wedding night vow. And go ahead.
Okay, I hit the button. She was 18.
Yep. Remember, she was 18.
She was 18.
Can't blame her for this.
She was 18.
But go for it.
It made me the most mad of anything. I have several times written down you fucking idiot. To Victor Frankenstein.
No, let's be very clear. He's the idiot.
For whom fate is coming like a semi-truck, bearing down on him. And he's just kind of walking across the road. Oh my gosh, dude. And thinking, he thinks something bad's going to happen, has no idea. Like, he's looking the wrong way. Semi-truck's coming one way, he's looking the other way, and boy.
So anyway.
And we readers can see it. We're like, guy, come on.
Yep.
Anyway. Speaking of all these things happening, we should...
Let's get to the plot. And of course, with books, we do it in a slightly different way. So we're going to do the jacket blurb version of the book. Anna, have you ever wanted to explore the Arctic Circle without distraction? Well, that's not what happens here.
I have wanted to go to Antarctica, Dan.
Have you? I've been to Antarctica, Anna. I don't know if I've mentioned that. Anyway, Gadfly Robert Walton captains a ship headed for the North Pole out of St. Petersburg. On the voyage, his crew sees what looks like a giant in the snow riding a sled. A few hours later, they pick up a near-death Victor Frankenstein. As Victor recuperates, he tells his tale to Walton, who in turn relays the tale in epistolary form to his sister Margaret. Turns out that Frankenstein is the world's most tortured graduate student ever, Anna. Raised in Geneva and betrothed to his cousin Elizabeth at an early age, because that's what they did back then. He attends the University of Ingolstadt.
Not blood cousin.
Okay.
Just raised together. Super
Still creepy.
Maybe more creepy.
Let me put it this way. All right, let's get to this right now. Did they seem more like brother and sister as you were reading the novel? Yeah, they seem totally like brother and sister. So
no, it's totally creepy. She is not a blood relation.
Okay, so fair enough.
He calls her cousin. It's still gross.
Anyway, he attends the...
There's lots of women being handed off to men in this, actually.
I guess, or being created, as it were, or whatever. All right. He attends the University of Ingolstadt in Germany to study natural philosophy. Reading both modern scientists and ancient alchemists, he stumbles upon the secret to create life from lifelessness through electricity. In flagrant violation of 19th century human subjects committees, Frankenstein assembles the body parts and viscera necessary to resurrect an 8-foot-tall man. His experiment is a success, but the visage of his creature is so repulsive to Frankenstein that he abandons his laboratory in horror. When he returns a day or two later, the creature is gone. Thus begins...
Sorry, this is one of the parts of the book that you're kind of like, you have to...
She was 18.
Because, like, he just runs away. Like, it's just like, gross!
That doesn't really think about what could the consequences be.
Yeah. It's almost like he forgets, like, there's this idyll, like, between, where he's like, that was scary, I wonder what happened. He's gone.
What happens is a series of unfortunate events, in which Victor gets sick a lot, his family members die gruesome deaths, and he eventually meets his creation, who has its own harrowing tale to tell to his creator. He asks Frankenstein to make a lady mate for him, so he no longer needs the company of men. Frankenstein agrees, and with his friend Henry Clerval, journeys to Scotland so Victor can continue his work. Consumed with fear and loathing, however, Frankenstein decides in the end he cannot go through with it, enraging his creation. The result is even more death, sickness, and tragedy, resulting in Frankenstein pursuing his demons, both metaphorical and actual, towards the North Pole. It ends badly for almost everyone, with the possible exception of Captain Walton. Anna, does that about sum it up?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think that there's some interesting avenues along the side, like the creature's education, which is both hilarious and sad. Like, it is one of the least plausible things. Again, she was 18. She was 18.
She was 18, listeners.
She was 18. It's not like, Robinson Crusoe filling his pockets after he strips, but it's sort of along those lines where the creature lives in secret next door to a cottage for a year.
Hovel that no one apparently ever goes into.
It's like an invisible hovel. An
invisible hovel where, by the way, like, I think for half that year, he's been collecting firewood and, like, helping out the family. The family is obviously mystified this. They never seem to investigate it, though.
Never investigate. They just assume it's like a good spirit of some kind. Also, at some point during that, he learns English. And not just English, but he stumbles upon...
I think to be clear, he actually learns French.
Okay, you're right. Yeah. He learns French. So he stumbles upon 3 French translations.
I assume so, yes. They had to have been French translations.
Of Young Werther, The Sorrows of Young Werther, Plutarch's Lives, and Paradise Lost. Those are the books that he forms his personality out of, which, And
there are worse books, there are better books, yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, it's just funny. Like, it's of all the books to pick, like, I mean, Mary Shelley's like, I'll give it
will say this. It was a legitimately shocking thing. I mean, again, I'm rereading the book, and so I sort of knew this, but it was actually shocking when I was reading it, where the creature starts to speak, and he's speaking like an English gentleman, for lack of a better way of putting it. Like, you're not expecting that to happen.
Although in French,
yes, I guess. A French gentleman or a Swiss
But also
gentleman.
he must learn English?
He must at some point, yeah.
Not clear. Waving hands, she's 18. She's 18. She's 18. Just keep, you gotta, like, a lot of it, she's 18. That's the hand wave here. I do love that Walton does appear to learn something.
And apparently is the only character in the entire novel to have learned anything. That, like, you know, emotionally, as it were.
And this is actually, I guess, the one true twist. So if you're really if you really want to read it and want to be surprised, what happens is that Walton, I think he's going to the North Pole to study magnetism.
I think he's just going, yes. That's scientific curiosity would be the way to put it, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and they get stuck in the ice, and he wants to continue, and his crew members are not so excited about that. And Frankenstein's like, you must go on for the sake of science, which is a little bit of a surprising thing, although not really, because that is like, if there's hubris in this, right? Like that's
but basically, Walton sort of figures out, maybe whatever Frankenstein is suggesting I do the opposite. I might live a better life that way. And as it turns out, he's probably right.
And I want to say I've been rewatching The Terror, the first season of The Terror, which is fantastic. Oh my God, you haven't seen it, Dan? Oh my God, it's so good. AMC, it's about the voyage, the Terror and the Erebus expedition to the North Pole. They got stuck there. And then for a long time, hundreds of years, 200 years, I guess, no one knew what happened to them. And there's a great Dan Simmons novel that it's based on, and it has my boyfriend, Jared Harris, in it. Okay. And it's fantastic. But hubris, there's a spoiler alert, although since I told you they got stuck, not spoiler, there's a point at which Jared Harris is like, we should turn around. And the other captain's like, no, God is on our side. For England, we shall discover the North Passage. And Jared Harris is like, I think we should turn around. I think we should turn around. And that doesn't happen. And also the wedding night thing. So
for listeners, okay. If you haven't read, and we should actually explicitly say what it is, but you know,
it doesn't. When we keep saying wedding night, that might sound like something.
Yeah. So to be clear, and the funny thing is, this is I guess technically this really isn't Chekhov's, because this happens in the third act. Frankenstein decides that he cannot create a female companion for his creature.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes, exactly. And the creature comes and basically says, "How dare you? You went back on your word. I will see you on your wedding night." Which Frankenstein interprets as, "Oh no, he's going to kill me on my wedding night," without ever occurring to him that maybe he was going to do to Frankenstein what Frankenstein did to him, which is take away his chance at happiness. Like, this is the dumbest fucking graduate student ever, Anna. Like, you know. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I mean, he book smart.
But street stupid. Yes.
But never read any satire or, like, you know, plays that have irony in them.
Yes. Clearly unversed in Shakespeare. So, yeah, that's fair. Yep. All right. So let's get to, how is this science fiction different from all other science fictions? But in this case, Anna, I think the better question to ask is, how does this science fiction define the genre? Because, again, this came from, you know, this is an urtext, as it were.
It's different in that it's the first. Like, it's the real question is, how are other science fictions different? What did they do differently than this? Because this is the text. But yes, what did it do to define? So
a couple things come to mind. The most obvious is that, and it really is true, Shelley sort of mixes cutting edge science at the time. Like, electricity as a word, I think, was a relatively new concept with the sort of discussion of alchemy to create a sort of fantastical outcome. And I actually really liked that. It was well done. Second, this is a panoramic novel. Like, this goes all across Europe. Frankenstein
It's like Jason
It does,
Bourne.
a little bit.
It's
Like the book starts in St. Petersburg. There are scenes in Geneva, Cologne, Paris, Rotterdam, London, Dublin. I did like the Irish. I'd forgotten about the Irish interlude, which I found very amusing.
Oh yeah, where they don't take
no, those Irish are like, fuck you. What are you doing here? It was I'm not sure how the Irish will feel about their depiction, but yeah, seems fair. And then finally, the other thing, the thing that really.
Well, they do say, well, you're British.
Yes, I did like that. That was funny. Which, we're
usually like strangers, but you seem British.
And the other thing is just the meta nature of the novel, which is there are framing stories within framing stories. There is a point in the middle of this book where we are learning the story of the de Lacy family, which is the family that the creature is sort of half stalking, half observing. So that's the creature's narrative, which is in turn embedded within Frankenstein's narrative, which is in turn embedded within Walton's narrative. That's a lot of embedding on them. That's the way I would put that. Yeah. And that is sort of a sci-fi thing that we often see.
I would say on the science tip, as far as like combining, cutting edge science with alchemy or whatever, she also combines fantastical elements, cutting edge science, and the real world. And by real world, I mean like real, like sort of, I guess I'm saying what you're saying, but I think
better
that the travel narrative part and her very evocative descriptions of the physical and built environment help ground, literally kind of ground the novel in a way that makes it easier to take, all the fantastical stuff. I mean, some of her descriptions of the natural world are,
the way I would put it is it's almost like Gibson-esque. I mean, like you can draw a straight line from this to Neuromancer in terms of how the description winds up adding to the sort of the world that, that they're creating.
Because also she's talking about because her descriptions of the real world help make the imagined stuff seem more tangible, right? This might be the first use of, you're not going to believe this, but not in those exact words, but there is a scene in which Frankenstein decides he's going to tell the truth this time. There's a lot of no one's going to believe me. This is the first trope of no one's going to believe me, so I guess I can't tell
which
anybody.
Is a classic science fiction trope of, oh my God, I can't believe I saw this alien. Oh, no one's going to believe. Yeah.
There's like the reasons why you can't go to the police, right? You always have to have a reason why you can't go to the authorities. So he's kind of like, well, no one's going to believe me. And then finally he decides he has to tell someone, and it's almost exactly this. You're not going to believe me. But
by the way, this is where I actually love that scene because Shelley makes it clear that like the authority believes him, but then the moment the authorities ask, "Well, you're going to do something about this, right?" He's like, "No. Like I believe you, but people will think I'm nuts if I go that far." That I actually like that. That was great.
And speaking of other tropes, I think this invented. There's also the first record scratch. You may be wondering how I got here
into the Arctic.
In the Arctic.
Funny story.
Funny story about that. And by this, of course, I mean like when Victor Frankenstein gets on the boat and he's like, okay, you may be wondering how I got here. Because literally they wonder because he's on a sled on a ice floe.
Yeah.
So, and then also I think this is kind of a modern or feels modern, although I guess we can go to, again, the great playwrights. It's very ambivalent towards its protagonist.
I would actually go further than that. I mean, there's a way in which you can argue that the two main characters, and let's segue into discussing the characters. The two main characters are anti-heroes.
Oh yeah, sure.
That would be the way. I mean, it's not that they're devoid of good qualities, but both Frankenstein and the creature do horrific things. There's no other way to put it.
It's a real Breaking Bad scenario here.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of like, because you have like an anti-hero who does what he does for reasons that are like, well, I guess I understand, and then his enemy who also, well, I guess I understand, like, but they do terrible, terrible things. Ultimately, to be clear, I think Mary Shelley is on this tip. They do terrible things.
Yes. But
that is not forgiven. Like the novel has no ambivalence about the terrible things.
No, and my understanding, by the way, is that this is as you note, there were two editions. There was the 1818 one, and then there's the 1831. I think in the 1831 edition is my understanding that Shelley made Victor even less likable, I guess would be the way to put it. That this is where maybe with the passage of time, she realized, oh, no, he's even worse than I had originally created. And I will say, like, reading it this time, I had forgotten large chunks of the plot. Obviously the creature commits heinous acts, but Victor is the author of all of this tragedy in a major way. And like, I remember reading for the first time, he sees his creation. He's repulsed by it and just runs away. And that's it. And I'm like, wait, that's it? That's what you do? Hold on, man. Come on.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think there's a really, interesting discussion to be had here. And maybe we'll just have it throughout this conversation about what his sin is, right? Because again, in the movie,
it's always the hubris of
the sin is hubris of like the science. Oh, you tried to play God. Oh, that's not the sin. I don't think so.
No, the sin is he creates something, he has responsibility for it, and he rejects that responsibility. His sin is that of a bad parent. This is the creature is an abandoned child. That's how I viewed it. And I don't know, maybe I'm colored by my own parenting here, but like that was the unforgivable act for me.
Yeah, I have some slightly different thoughts on that, but I think that's in there. I think that's in there. And I think that there's an ambivalence around that too, because she had her child taken from her. And then also she had her parents.
I would say yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that she feels kind of like she feels the tragedy on every side.
Good. That seems fair. Yeah.
And I think that it's informed by both those tragedies. But speaking of, we talked about the characters. So we got Team Frankenstein, Team Creature, both bad teams.
I enjoyed some of the minor characters. So actually, the Creature's tale of the Deleuces, like their narrative was actually kind of interesting to me. And it was more compelling than I remembered. Also, and again, I read this before in high school, reading this as a professor. The two professors at the university, I was just cracking up reading them, particularly Kemp. And
it's like the Goofus and Gallant.
It's just like, it's like, grad school has changed so much since the early 19th. Actually, this is set in the 17th century or 18th century. Grad school has changed so much since the 18th century, Anna, in that it's changed not at all. What about you?
So I'll say again, I really liked the fact that you can't be on either side, but you get both sides of the creature in Victor. Here is a weird thing. I was shocked that Elizabeth, who's the cousin, sister, whatever, didn't wind up with Clairville. Didn't you see that? I thought,
I guess. I mean,
that would have been like Victor gets treated so harshly by
that's
life.
True. Yeah.
Right.
In some ways that would have been
part of me was
that would have been a bigger tragedy. I agree with you. Like, although to be fair, like, losing Elizabeth on their wedding night, also pretty tragic. Yes.
Yes. And I believe I thought that would be a plot twist before it became clear that Elizabeth was going to be killed on their wedding night. So his best friend, Henry Clairville, who is one of the people, like, we get these really cool paeans to friendship throughout the book that I appreciated. And I don't think I have anything else to say about characters. But I have a question.
Oh, you do, Anna. Well, please ask away.
Is there IR in this book?
Anna, of what a strange nature is knowledge of IR. It clings to the mind when it has once seized on it, like a lichen on the rock. And that cursed knowledge tells me that, yes, there is IR in this book.
Okay. What do you know? There's actually kind of a very, very lot of IR.
Just on the surface.
But I look forward to...
But let me this way. The fundamental problem in this book is the question of credible commitment. So in essence, the book, like the key plot point of this book is that once Frankenstein and his creature finally meet face to face, the creature proposes a very simple bargain to Frankenstein. Make a companion. The two of them will travel to deepest, Peru, darkest Peru in South America, probably kill Paddington. But beyond that, they will leave, everyone else alone. What's so hard about that bargain? Well, for one thing, Victor finds the act of creation disgusting. So, yeah, that's a problem. But the bigger problem, I think, and Victor has this monologue in which he sort of relates this, he can't be sure the creature will follow through. Because, among other things, he can't be sure that the woman he creates would follow through. Because as he points out correctly, that woman did not agree to this. Like, if he creates her, she's not a part of this bargain. What if she has different, preferences? What if she has agency? God forbid that a woman should have agency in the early 19th century. On the other hand, a related issue is that the creature does not quite have the same problem, which is he can promise to kill Victor's family if Victor breaks his word. And guess what? Follows through on that. So it's a failure of coercion on the creature's part. The creature clearly should have intimated to Victor, if you don't do this, bad things are going to happen. Would the creature have kept his word? I actually think he would have. I read enough, admittedly, the very fact that he confessed to killing Frankenstein's brother is actually weirdly a sort of, it's a costly signal, because in doing so, you're obviously enraging Victor, but at the same time, you're demonstrating, look, I'm being honest with you about what happened. So you should believe me when I say that if you make, me a companion, I will leave you. And I think Frankenstein, should have trusted his creature's ability to credibly commit. One other small point, which is in the creature's description of how he gets educated, he discusses reading Volney's Ruins of Empires and learned some surprising things about IR. I was legit shocked at the discussion in which the creature weeps at the fate of the indigenous Americans due to colonization. Again, he's right, but
that comes up twice.
Yeah, and it's rather astonishing that a book written in 1818 would bring this up. It's definitely forward thinking. That part of the book is aged very well. And this is also, by the way, I would add, a surprisingly multicultural book. I mean, beyond the Citizen of Geneva, the Deleuze's are, I think, German. There's the Felix's girlfriend is Turkish, I believe.
I think she's referred to
Arabian,
as
but actually
Arabian,
it would be Turkish.
But
the point is that generally speaking, this is a surprisingly wide-ranging book in terms of what's happening. So that was good.
Henry, I believe, wants to learn Sanskrit or learn Sanskrit, and Victor reads the ancient poems of,
Agrippa.
I think they do refer to it
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I think there's some. She was 18. Also, it was 1816 racism in it. The most beautiful people are all blonde.
I guess, but let me put it this way. I know this can be a damning thing, but compared to the standards of the time, this is a ridiculously cosmopolitan book, is the way I would put it. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, and I think that if you asked Mary Shelley about what her beliefs were, I think she even by our standards, she would probably be pretty progressive and pretty anti-racist. And I wanted to say something about the creature keeping his word. I agree. I mean, a lot of that is, I think, a credit to her writing, that you can write a character that you believe, but you also understand why they're not believed.
Yes.
By the other people.
Let me put it this way. I found myself, I think the middle passage of this book, where the creature tells his tale, was for me the most affecting part of the book, I guess.
Yeah.
And yes, there's also some unintentional humor, like the idea of, oh yes, I learned words, and then I learned how to read, and from these 3 books, I was able to speak like a gentleman, and so forth. There's parts of that where, again, she's 18. But there is genuine tragedy and pathos in that section. That makes it, and it's funnily. I guess the way I would put it is that as much as the monster commits heinous acts, I found myself feeling this is more of a tragedy for the monster than it is for Victor.
I agree, but mostly because the monster didn't ask for any of this.
Yeah, fair enough. But you know what? I have another question for you, Anna.
Oh, what is it, Dan?
Is there a critique of capitalism in this book?
Dan. Before, I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books and heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote. But now capitalism has come. And men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood.
Yep.
Dan, this book has so much radical philosophy in it. You'd think it was written by the child of two radical philosophers.
It's written by a radical philosopher, Nepo baby. Yes.
Yes. So there's a big metaphor here, which is the whole thing's a metaphor for the Industrial Revolution and perhaps Marxist uprising, where Victor is management, monster is labor, cast out the instant it does not conform to his preferences, forced to live in poverty. eventually overthrowing his creator. This seems a little wild, right? Like, I can understand why people don't buy it. But I think it's important to remember Shelley's parents were super into the French Revolution. In fact, one or both of them traveled to France during it. They both wrote in favor of it. And then the Luddite Rebellion had happened just a couple of years beforehand, which was a real thing in case people don't know. And it was not about hating electronics. It was about, the replacement of men with machines, even at that early stage. And interestingly enough, Lord Byron, their host, spoke at the House of Lords opposing the introduction of the death penalty for machine breaking, which is what was proposed because the Luddites were breaking machines. And I just want people to imagine.
Also, I got to say, I'm Team Byron on that. I mean, like, yeah, that's a crime, but like, is that the death penalty? No, I don't think so.
But that's how serious this revolution was. And so this stuff is in the air. And then you do have a couple of things that the monster says that are relevant. Yeah. This is from his education. I heard of the division of property, of immense wealth and squalid poverty, of rank, descent, and noble blood. I learned that the possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages, but with either he was considered, except in very rare instances, as a vagabond and a slave, doomed to waste his power for the profits of the chosen few. And if that's a little complicated for people to get at, he's saying that unless you inherited your wealth and you're still wealthy, you're shit, Like, so that seems pretty, bald. And then there's just a ton of class stuff in general. And you hear a lot about it. And I think also you can argue that Frankenstein is like Victor Frankenstein. He's the real Nepo
Yes, that's fair.
Here,
yes,
right?
Totally fair.
Like, he's the embodiment of what happens when you have idle wealth. Like, you come to no good. And then, of course, the monstrous capitalism. I mean, that's the other reading. But
I would just add here that
that one's not actually as fun.
I think I thought of you most during the Irish sequence because that's and I have to assume Shelley did this on purpose because that's the sequence where you realize, oh my God, Victor's just a fucking dilettante. Like, all these poor Irish, folks are looking at him like, I'm sorry, what are you doing? Like, like.
Yeah. And he also made me think of Batman. He made me think of Bruce Wayne a lot. Cause like his superpower is that he's rich. Like that. And what does he use his money for? To create a human, like, and then just do nothing with it.
Life from lifelessness.
Because in this whole like money is his superpower, he keeps just saying over and over, and perhaps you notice this, I happen to have some money with me. Like whenever he gets into like dire straits, like he's just like, and I had money, so it was
fine.
So
totally did. Right. Yeah, worked out okay. Yep.
It was fine. And then we talked about this, but I think it's stunning to me as someone who didn't read it before, just how little a resemblance the morals of this book bear to anything that you would see on screen.
Yes. Basically, if your assumption that the plot of Frankenstein is from the movies, you think this is all about the, effect of scientific hubris. Yeah.
Trying to be God.
And to be fair, there's a little bit of that in the book, but like, it's not the major theme of the book.
Yeah, it's not that he tried to create life. It's that he created life in a vacuum, like without the benefit of nature or women. He's a large adult son, Dan. And it quickly morphs into a cycle of vengeance and violence. He's ruined by his emotions.
It's,
like
what's interesting is again, like had he...
His sin is vengeance. This is actually, I think, a lot of his sin is just the pure vengeance that he's driven by. He could have a happy life. The creature tells him at some point, like, why don't you just like...
I don't think his sin is vengeance. I think his sin is repulsion. I think it's or disgust.
Okay. Sure. I think you can kind of combine those, but I think he becomes driven, like the Breaking Bad thing. He becomes driven by his vengeance and his hatred and his desire to,
or better yet, he becomes driven by his baser emotions, I think would be the way to put it.
Yes.
That's fair. That's entirely fair. And so it's funny.
And other people,
I hadn't thought about this, but it's true. Like, ostensibly Victor Frankenstein is supposed to be this, height of erudition, brilliant guy, but in his act of creation winds up devolving back into, someone who in many ways is less sophisticated than the creation that he has.
Right. And also for all his scientific learning,
all the
his
book learning,
he becomes driven by emotion solely. Yeah. Like he approaches none of his problems rationally, like once he creates the monster.
And yes. The way I would put it, and we'll talk about this in a second, like the problem with both Frankenstein and his creation to some extent, but with his creation, you can understand it. With Frankenstein, you can't. Frankenstein has no theory of mind. He cannot comprehend how others would view what he is doing and or how others think. And that is his tragedy.
And then this is not my reading. I do think this is a feminist novel. I think it's a feminist novel a little bit because it's about like what happens when men try to create.
Okay, sure. Yes. Yeah.
I also think this is something's pointed out before. He resists creating a female version of the monster out of terror that they might reproduce and terror that she might reject the monster. Like both of those things are frightening to him. So like the female body is frightening to Victor on some level. But more than anything else, and we said this before, this is a book about grief. Yes. Like there is just an really beautiful evocations of it too. Like even though I don't like Victor, when he
suffers.
His family,
there's no denying that. Yeah.
It is some beautiful language that really gets to what grief can feel like. I think this is really interesting. As soon as I kind of started to get to the end of the book and I was like, wow, like everyone's gotten this wrong. Like all the different movies out there, like they don't reflect like what this is really about. I Googled movies adapting Frankenstein directed by women.
What'd you come up with? Oh, there are none. There are none.
Okay. None. No, there's been no female director or filmmaker that has adapted this. We would see something different.
Now, let me ask, this is an interesting question. What current lady director would you want to actually make this film?
Oh, wow. I don't know. Do you have...
I have to say my first gut response is Catherine Bigelow.
That's who I thought of too, actually. Because she's
right, exactly.
Really
yes,
well.
No, like this is that would be, her métier, as it were. Like, unfortunately, I hate to say this, like, some of the other women...
Sofia Coppola.
Greta Gerwig. I mean, like
Sofia Coppola, it would be like so beautiful. It would be just like these kind of like, she likes to, and she loves movies about like women who are kind of like lost. And I think that she could tell this story in a really interesting way. Yeah. I really do. I think she would see the gender flop. In a way, it is a gender flop here. Like when you flip the gender of the created and the creator, like I think she might really like that. But Greta Gerwig, sure,
could
that too.
It's time for Discordant Notes. This is when our patrons might ask us questions about what we're reviewing, and we answer them on the podcast. And this week's question comes from Renee, who says, and in some ways it's connected to what we just talked about, would this story have been different if told by Mark Shelley rather than Mary Shelley? And as I said, I think the answer is maybe, but in the same sense that I agree with you on it, this is a story that is primarily about grief much more than about hubris. What is striking to me is the way in which Shelley makes it clear how the two main characters have such a piss-poor theory of mind. And for lack of a better way of putting it, if there are gender differences, generally women are believed to have somewhat better theories of mind. And so, I'm not sure a male author would have even thought of that as a flaw, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would be different. Like, as I was saying, like it's interesting to me that like men who are adapting this book look at it and think, "Oh, it's about ambition," because that's, I guess, that's a male preoccupation, right? Is success, and it's true that preoccupies Victor. But
that's not what the book is about. I agree.
That's not what the book is about. I was surprised by how much I like this. In fact, that brings us to the next question, Dan.
Cannon or fodder, Anna?
I'll go first. Canon. More people should actually read it. The language can be a lot. It's, 19th century syntax. There's a lot of flower, floweriness and overwrought sentiment. But that's how people wrote. And she was 18. She's 18. And also, once you kind of get used to it,
you don't really notice. Yeah, I would agree. This is so much canon. And I think the thing that I found affecting, which I'd forgotten, was actually what moved me was the last sequence where the monster finally has his comeuppance and that Frankenstein dies and feels nothing but sorrow and emptiness and sadness. And that, in some ways, that's what makes this a great novel. Because it was the one moment where I was like legitimately, it's both surprising but entirely accurate. And, that's where you can't believe that someone who's 18 wrote that. And again.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that it's depiction of the emotional scale, the emotional spectrum of grief in a way. Like the different, again, it's a poo-poo platter of love and a poo-poo platter of grief, Dan. Different kinds of grief that one can experience.
Poo-poo platter, speaking of which.
It's like emeralds falling from the sky.
It's time for the debris field. This is when we bring up things that we had not gotten to previously in the podcast. Anna, what do you got?
I was talking about there's all these different states of mind that are depicted. Depression is there for like really good descriptions of just what it's like to not be able to think of anything else besides like what is bringing you down, that you just can't, you can't escape your own thoughts of death, of grief, or whatever. Like that seems to me like a really good description of depression.
The way I would put it is, there's a way in which this is a sort of classic Victorian novel, which, and I confess I find this amusing, which I'm probably not supposed to, but like the ways in which essentially Frankenstein's emotional turmoil is translated into physical illness. Like after every death, he's like, oh, and then I had to convalesce for another 3 months or 2 years or whatever. And like, he's committed to a sanatorium or whatever. And, I did, it's always amusing to read, like, cause this is not hardly unique to Shelley, but like in all of these novels, something bad happens, inevitably like neuralgia kicks in or something where like, they've got to be in a sanatorium for a while.
Along those same lines, I think that one of the things that she describes that he undergoes sounds a lot to me like mania. Yeah. Like when he is working on the
bipolar?
Creature.
That's an interesting question.
And for those who don't know, like it, or who haven't read it, but both, he is obsessive about it, and he can do nothing but think about the creature. He can do nothing but work on it. He neglects all these other things in his life, and he doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat, like all that.
Yes.
Yes, Dan?
Okay. One could call that bipolar. The other thing one could call that is being a graduate student. I'm just going to say,
or being a writer. I actually, the other thing that I thought about that you could say it's depression, mania, bipolar disorder. You could also say that there is a story here about just what it is like to try and wring something out of yourself.
I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I was first courting my wife, and I was working on my dissertation, we would be going on walks or something, or we in the Bay Area, and there would be times where she would say something and I wasn't entirely paying attention, and she would then look at me and it's like, you weren't thinking about me right then, were you? You were thinking about your dissertation. And I was, Anna. I was. She's still married you. That's great.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Next thing is yours, Dan.
It's a little silly thing, but like, how does Victor not get arrested on his wedding night for attempted murder?
I know. Yeah. I thought about that too. He is able to point to the creature's foot.
And I get that, but like, there was a point I guess in some ways also because it would have been a replay of what happens in Ireland, but it was like, I think you needed a little more there, like to like how he managed to quickly avoid being the accused, but yes. Okay. Go, your turn.
Oh, I am next. So I mentioned all these great descriptions of different kinds of love and different kinds of grief. The ones about friendship, there's a couple that I thought I would quote. So this is when Walton he actually has talked about how much he misses having friends earlier. And one of the reasons why he's so delighted to find the half-dead Victor Frankenstein is that he really likes him, like he needs a buddy. He needs a pal. And he's very excited to like have someone who seems so interesting. And he tells Frankenstein, like,
I'm sorry. I'm very amused that you're saying Frankenstein. Like that's from Young Frankenstein.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yes, that's right.
You mean Frankenstein? Yes.
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. Frankenstein. So he tells him basically like, oh, I'm glad we're friends. I've been missing, I needed a friend. And Victor says, I agree with you. We are unfashioned creatures, but half made up. If one wiser, better, dearer than ourselves, such as a friend ought be, do not lend his aid to perfectionate our weakness and faulty natures. And he says, I once had a friend, the most noble of human creatures, and I'm entitled, therefore, to judge respecting friendships. You have hope and a world before you and no cause for despair. But I have lost everything. So, I think that's both a nice description of friendship and, of course, like the loss.
Speaking of quotes, I'm just going to read this quote from from Professor Kemp, which not going to lie, I have dreamed of telling at least one student this, where he says to Frankenstein, because he's rubbishing the idea that reading alchemy is of any use. Did I say Frankenstein too? God!
Yeah.
Curse you, Mel Brooks! I can't apologize for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Kemp tells him, every minute, every instant that you have wasted on these books is utterly and entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. It's just like, again, I am in awe that Mary Shelley at the age of 18 nails what a professor would say. Like, that is genius. It's just genius.
Especially, I didn't mention, she didn't go to school. She was like homeschooled, basically. Really well homeschooled. But yeah, the whole professor thing is pretty good. And as I've been alluding to, I think on some level, this is about the act of creativeness, the creative creation, not just like creating life, but like, what is it like to have something that you want to do? And then how do you make it happen? And I think this is not just writers. I've related to it as a writer, but I think she's talking about anyone who has like this thing in their head that they want to make real, and how difficult that is. A couple of the quotes. Invention, it must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of a void, but out of chaos. The materials must in the first place be afforded. It can give form to dark, shapeless substances, but cannot bring into being the substance of itself, which I liked. And then let's talk about first drafts. Thus situated, employed in the most detestable occupation, immersed in the solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged, my spirits were unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my persecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them, lest they encounter the object which I so much detested to behold.
My God, Shelley's talking about the blank screen.
Yeah. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest alone then someone should come to claim his companion. So, and then I'm not imagining things. In the introduction, Mary Shelley writes how she could not come up with something in this, like contest that they were having about ghost stories, and just taking her, like she wanted to come up with a real banger, and like considering who she has to impress, and was having trouble. She says, I felt that blank incapability of invention, which is the greatest misery of authorship, when dull nothing replies to our anxious invocations. And she puts nothing in caps. Like, so when nothing, the thing that is nothing replies to our invocations. Love that.
Two last little things. First, it's interesting, and I kind of want to know more about this. Shelley talks about Germans and Italians at various times in this novel, which is fascinating because Germany and Italy didn't exist when she's writing this. Germany is a nation, you could argue, but it's not a state, and same with Italy. German reunification and Italian reunification don't happen for another, at the time of her writing, 50 years, and at the time of when the book is set, another 100 years. So it shows that, like, you could think of Germans and Italians as, nationality, but not necessarily an actual state. And finally, I'm going to close with this. If there's one minor thing that maybe prejudices me against Frankenstein, It's that Geneva is boring as fuck. Geneva is gorgeous, but Geneva is one of those cities that should be way better than it is. Like, it's got the lake.
Oh, wait, Dan, have you saying you've been to Geneva?
Yes, I'm saying I've been to Geneva. It's a gorgeous city. There's a lake, there's mountains. It is the most boring place that should be interesting that I have ever been to.
It sounds just, I mean, the descriptions of the mountains
are nice.
Are really wonderful. Yeah. And actually, he goes to a glacier, and the description of it is very evocative. And of course, I had to look up pictures, and like half that glacier doesn't exist anymore. Sure looked cool in those early photographs. So thanks, global warming. Thanks for ruining the landscapes of Frankenstein. Mel
Brooks is slowly taking over this podcast. So one last thing, which is, it is interesting to me that, like, there's the creature tells the story of encountering the old man and encountering the young girl. And it is fascinating how the movies have, like, those two things recur, but in very different form from how it appears in the novel. And it is striking to me the degree to which, in, like, the modern consciousness, how we think of Frankenstein, God damn it, how we think of the monster is very different from how Shelley, puts it in the novel.
And again, she was 18. One thing, though, is it's also interesting to me, like, how the depiction of the monster, of the creature, has changed from the page. The creature she describes is actually only the face that's bad.
I think
right?
so. Yes. Yeah.
Like, from what she describes, it's
8
huge,
feet tall,
which is a little weird. It's like, it's 8 feet tall, but he in fact talks about how it has perfect limbs and is muscular, and, like, I think Greek gods might be invoked, but it's the visage that is
watery eyes,
so
yellow eyes, I think. Yeah.
And, like, black
yes, the black lips stood out to me.
I think.
That's true. Yeah.
Which I do think a lot of the creatures in the movies have black lips. But I would be fascinated to see a modern interpretation of what it might look like. I think it would look a lot more. I think I would accept. What did I say? Accept. I would be interested in a movie that maybe just made the creature attractive in some way. Like, hideous. You'd have to make the hideousness part of it, because otherwise, why do you run away? Which, again, that's the thing that all the movies, I guess, there's a thing that the movies have to do that she does badly. She was 18, which is like, why the fuck did you run away?
And in the yes, and in the novel, it's the first thing you're like, wait, what is he doing? And then you would think this might be an area where the films actually have an advantage, because you can actually demonstrate the repulsiveness. But
yeah, but and they either in the movies he doesn't run away. Like, actually, that's the thing, is, like, in the movies they never think, oh my god, first thing that happens is that, oh, I've created. Instead, it's live, it's alive.
Oh god, I hate to say it. You know who could make a version of this that it would be somewhat plausible? Judd Apatow. Like, imagine Seth Rogen as Frankenstein.
Oh, that
like,
works.
And he's like, holy shit. He like creates it like, oh my god, holy shit, I gotta get out of here. Like, you could totally see Seth Rogen doing that. That's all I'll say on that. Yeah.
That works. Yeah. That totally works. All right. I think we are just about done. I don't think we have anything else, unless you know. Nope. Canon, go read it if you haven't. I'm sure the Discord will have a fun discussion of it. And, oh gosh, the Discord. Did we mention the Discord?
We have a Discord. It's awesome. If you become a patron, you get to meet the rest of the Discord. If we have, we are trying to get to 250 patrons. If we get to 250 patrons, we will release an episode that is for patrons only on a topic chosen by the patrons.
No TV show, no video.
No 9-hour movie about the Holocaust.
No 9-hour movie about the Holocaust. Those are the things. And I will say that the Discord, I started a introductions channel because I realized we didn't have one. So people who are introducing themselves, just to have kind of almost like a yearbook repository of, like, if, people just their bios. And we have such interesting people on the Discord. Kate, who's the 72-year-old power lifter.
Damn.
Yeah, she's like a national champion in her age group. And then we have like the toy designer. We have like people who used to recovering hedge fund person, computer programmers, like lawyers, people who work in politics, like such an interesting group of people united by our love of science fiction. There's so many great conversations, not just about science fiction. It, to me, is the main reason to join for as little as $3 a month. Also, you get the episodes on the Friday before the Monday.
And you get access to our monthly AUAs.
And what else do you do, Dan? What are you up to when you're not enjoying talking to me on a Friday afternoon?
Eating on Blue Sky. I am at Dan Dresner there. I have a Substack called Dresner's World, in which I am repeatedly trying to defy Anna's predictions about the end of Substack. And, that's about it for now. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, you write stuff. You're like a writer.
Well, you're a writer too, though. Yeah.
Foreign policy?
I write reviews for Foreign Policy. I occasionally write for Politico. I got that stuff. What about you, Anna? I believe you have a website. Correct?
I have a website.
www.annamariecox.com. Yep.
It's spelled the same, pronounced differently. I write for NBC.com and the New Republic. I also teach a writing workshop. Also, upcoming NaNoWriMo National Novel Writing Month. I have a morning writing group that will be starting for NaNoWriMo, which you can join. And it's just, I did it last year. It's really cool. People pay a not very grand sum of money to join me on a Zoom call at 6:30 in the morning. And then we all write. We write an hour. And it is a really great way to have some accountability and community. And you can visit my website. There'll be more information about that up there. And then we have coming up.
We will be doing No One Will Save You on Hulu. And then the book version of The Shining by that Stephen King guy.
That's right. And until then,
keep this channel open for more.